Brian, you've said that you want to make Michigan a top 10 state for education in the next 10 years. So I guess to even go forward with that, do you have to start with a grade? What kind of grade would you give Michigan's education system right now?
Well, it depends on what stats you look at, but mostly we're performing a lower third of the state, so that wouldn't be a very good grade that we would have to give ourselves if we were honestly looking at it. But with that said, there's a lot of great things happening in classrooms all over the state of Michigan. There's a lot of great teachers who are building relationships and making a difference in the lives of kids. So individual classrooms, a lot of great things going on. Overall as a system, we need to do much better.
All right, you just started the job on July 1st. Do you have a first 100-day plan, or what do you have starting in the works now?
As you said, we want to make Michigan a top 10 state in the next 10 years. So what we're doing is going around and listening to people, asking that question, getting input from business people, educators, classroom teachers, experts in the field, think tanks. We're having people come to board meetings in August and September and share that. And so we're really kind of listening and learning right now to see what we need to do to make Michigan a top 10 state.
So what have you heard? Anything that has surprised you?
No, nothing that's surprisingly, but we've heard that poverty counts. We've heard that we have to be engaged in preschool. We have to have opportunities and options for kids throughout their education. We need to have college and career-ready things, including giving kids opportunities to graduate from high school with college credits. So I don't think we're going to hear anything earth-shattering, but it's important to listen to the experts so that we can build a coalition around how do we make Michigan this. I could come out with my top 10 on my own, but then I don't have the support to change Michigan the way we need to. So it really is about listening and learning to others and building a coalition to move Michigan forward.
All right, well, let's start talking about some of these specifics. And since you started talking about poverty, we can jump off right there because many of the low-performing schools have a high number of impoverished kids. How do you start to work on that when you're trying to help out?
It's a very important question. And unfortunately, we have focused on who is managing the districts, the role of the board, role of the superintendent, emergency manager. All those things are important, but if we don't focus on the classroom, we're not going to see changes in those districts. So what we need to do is provide support to those local districts and send almost an army of experts in to see what's happening into the classroom, make some recommendations of changes that need to be made, some professional development to make sure the staff knows how to work with students of poverty, know how to work with students who are struggling. Provide that support to the teachers, and then really change the classroom instruction from the teacher being a teacher to being a facilitator of the learning. Students need to take ownership, whether it's in second or third grade, they should know their reading level, their math level, they should chart where they're at, and then as they grow throughout the year, they need to chart that growth. And when students are invested in their own education, they do much better. So we need to get students owning their education, teachers taking a step back, and facilitating the learning.
Is there also a ... that parents need to have an ownership in the education as well?
They do, and as you know, in many poverty situations, it may not be parents, it may be guardians or grandparents or other family members, but the answer to that is yes. In the school that I used to run, it was a very low-performing school. We got the parents engaged. We brought them in, we taught them how to work with their kids in reading and in math, so that when they're at home, because see, we only have them 12% of the calendar year. 88% of the time they're not in schools. So we need that partnership with the parents to set aside, and as we start school's about to start, we need parents to set aside a half hour to an hour every night so that their students can read, play math games, play games with the families, put down the electronic equipments, turn off the TV, and really concentrate and have fun as a family while they're learning.
Let's talk a little bit about teachers. Do you think the teachers in Michigan feel supported?
No, I don't think they do. And, education has been under attack in Michigan for the last decade or so. And I think that's unfortunate because, the teachers are the experts. They know what they need to do, and we need to support them. And quite frankly, why would someone go in being a teacher right now? You're going to graduate, you're going to make it in the low 30s, and you're going to have this constant pressure and attack. Now, with that said, do we need to do better? We do. We do need to do better, but we need to do better by supporting our great teachers, helping the teachers who are struggling to do better, and the handful of teachers that aren't cut out for teaching, we need to help them find an exit.
How should we be evaluating our teachers?
Well, whether you're a superintendent, a board member, an administrator, or a teacher, you should be evaluated. And the legislature, I'm calling on them to pass legislation on how we should be evaluating and what percentage of it should be on student performance. And if the legislature passes a bill, that's great. If they don't, then I'll move forward using the authority of State Superintendent to say, districts, you need to evaluate using one of the 4 models that came out of the Ball report. And if a local district wants a different model, they can use a different model. But with our limited dollars, we will only provide support and training in those 4 models that the Ball report came out with. So evaluating our teachers is very important. It's important for any employee, whether you work in the auto industry or any industry, to sit down with your boss and say, what are my strengths? What am I doing well at? And where are my opportunities to improve? And then we need to provide professional development for those areas where improvement's needed. And you can only do that by having those conversations and by getting into the classroom and seeing how the teachers are performing.
You've talked about teacher pay just a moment ago. You're supportive of merit pay?
Merit pay, not in a traditional sense that says that, you know, you do X, you get merit pay. But if you're teaching in a poverty situation, you deserve merit pay. If you're getting a year's worth of growth out of your students, you deserve merit pay. But what's difficult with merit pay in an education situation is you and I might both be teachers. I might have 10 or 15 special ed kids, 5 or 6 ELL kids. You might have none of those in your class. So your performance might look better than mine, and I might actually be doing a better job based on where my students started and where I take them. So as long as we're talking about merit pay, saying here's where I got the students and here's where I took them, then I think merit pay is a fine part of the process. But it's got to be worked out so that we're taking kids to a year's growth.
Right now, the Department of Education, though, has no way to track or enforce what kind of merit pay is coming out for any teacher, though.
No, that's negotiated at the local level. I certainly can use my bully pulpit to talk about things that I think are important.
Let's talk about standardized testing, because I think for parents and students and teachers and administrators, it can be a little frustrating, especially what happened with the M-STEPS last year. The fact that the test was changed at the last minute from what was supposed to be the Smarter Balanced, and then they had an entirely different test in the spring. You have just come out in the last couple of weeks saying that test is now going to be shortened. Why is that going to be shortened?
Well, as a local superintendent, before taking on this role, I heard from our parents, our teachers, our community members about the length of the test and how we're spending too much time testing kids. Not only at a local level we test kids, but also the state level assessment. So working with, I think the Department of Education did a great job at the last minute, as you said, having to come up with a new test. So I credit them for coming up with the new assessment, doing it quickly, and quite frankly, we had very little problems implementing it except for the length. And so this year we're taking 8 hours away from the 11th grade test, and we're taking 2.5 hours away from most of the elementary grades except 5th and 8th. And so we are shortening the test, and that's step one. Long term, I'd like to have a conversation about what assessments do you need at a local level to drive instruction, and what type of an assessment do we need at a state level to hold people accountable for the $14 billion in tax dollars that are used. But is there a way to do one assessment so that we can save money on our assessments, but most importantly save time and have more time for classroom instruction?
All right, let's turn our attention to Detroit. How involved are you going to be in any kind of school reforms for the DPS?
Well, I hope very involved. Constitutionally, the State Superintendent, State Board of Education should be a leading player in education. And so we have had conversations with Detroit. We've had conversations with the governor and legislative leaders. You know, again, who leads Detroit schools is an important conversation, but I want to focus my time and energy on what's happening in the classrooms in Detroit and what we're going to do to support the teachers and provide them the training and support they need to make these students successful. So that's one focus. Number two, quite frankly, you know, we're going to have to look at the Detroit's debt. If we don't help Detroit pay off their debt today, if we let it go 4 or 5 years and then the state or court makes us pay it off, the debt's going to be much worse. So I think it's a tough pill to swallow, but we need to help them with their debt today. Number three, we do need to return an elected board. You know, we live in a country that believes in democracy and believes in people having say, and so we need to return the elected board at some point as part of this process. And then number four, we really would like to see a return of a superintendent type position, but I understand the discussions that are going on, but really the whole focus needs to be not on who's leading the schools, but what's happening in the classrooms.
This is where it gets a little political as well, because the State School Reform Office is run or essentially reports to the governor. It's no longer part of the Michigan Department of Education. What is your relationship with the governor right now?
I think very positive. We've had opportunities to meet before I became state superintendent, and since I think the governor and I are on the same page about making Michigan a top 10 performing state in the next 10 years. I think we're on the same page with the conversations that we just had on assessments. I think we're on the same page in terms of focusing on the classroom. So I think the governor and I will work hand in hand with the state board and the legislature to make Michigan a top 10 performing state. And in our conversation, it's really like 3 or 4 years from now, if we haven't made these changes, shame on us. This is our opportunity to really help kids be successful. And I think the governor's committed to that, the state board is committed to that, and I'm committed to that.
Are we funding public schools in the best way right now in Michigan?
Probably not. Proposal A has worked and has been was a great reform when it came out. Because of lack of funding it, I think has really been the problem. But when we look at funding kids, you know, there's a notion that every child should be worth X amount, 8,000, 9,000, whatever it is. That's really not a fair reflection of what needs to happen, because kids in poverty need more. Students of English language learners need more. Special education students need more. So I think we need to come up with a system that has a lower base foundation and then adds on for things that like poverty, like English language learners, like special ed. Some districts spend no money on transportation. Some have to spend $7–8 million on transportation, so that's got to be a factor. You know, retirement and healthcare costs are killing school districts as it is businesses around the country, and that needs to be continually to be addressed. And I thank the governor and the legislature over the last few years for really addressing the retirement and healthcare. It's the only thing keeping, that reform is the only thing keeping a lot of school districts in the positive.
All right, let's talk a little bit about charter schools, because I believe that that is still a very sensitive or hot button issue for a lot of people. There are a very small number of charter schools opening around the state this year. What do you attribute that drop in number to, do you think?
Well, I think maybe a saturation of charter schools in some areas, like Detroit and other urban areas. So I think there's been a lot of charter schools opening over the last number of years, so I think maybe we're reaching a level. I think that's part of it. Should we have charter schools? Yes. Should we have options for parents? Yes. But do we need to do it in a way that makes sense? It doesn't make sense for us to close a school building over here and mothball it and then have a new school open a mile down the street and spending tax dollars to open that school. So we do need to have a process and not a political discussion. This isn't pro or anti-charter school or pro or anti-public schools. What is in the best interest of the kids and the taxpayers? That's the conversation. So if it makes sense to open up a charter school, we ought to open it up. If it doesn't make sense, then we ought to consider having that charter school in a different location.
How aggressive do you plan to be with authorizers who have low-performing charter schools?
I have met with all the authorizers, and we've talked about accountability. If you're going to take tax dollars, it doesn't matter whether you're a traditional public school, a charter, or an online school. If you take tax dollars, you have to be accountable for performance. You have to be accountable for how the dollars are spent. So all schools should be accountable for performance and transparency on how they spend their dollars.
How important is pulling Michigan's education system to that top 10 in the country for where we are right now as a state?
Well, Michigan's a great state. It's a great place to live and raise a family. We want it to be a great place to have businesses come in and operate. We want it to be a great place for education to take place. By improving our education system, we're going to improve opportunities for kids. We're going to help them earn more money as they move on to adulthood and life, and have more opportunities to be successful and more options in the business and career world. So it's very important for not only for how students perform, but also for the economy, that Michigan be a top 10 performing state.
Do we have too many school districts in the state? Should there be some kind of consolidation?
Well, where it makes sense, yes. And, you know, this is a very tough issue for parents, right? The schools are the identity of many communities. And so when there's talk of consolidating and closing schools, it's a very tough conversation. But where it makes sense, where the communities have come together and said, you know, it would make sense for us to merge our schools, because then we'd have more options for kids. We could spend more money on providing services to the students. Then it makes sense. I don't think we can sit here and force consolidation. We ought to incentivize it and we ought to help make it happen when it can. There's a lot of tough issues like tax issues that have to be resolved as well. So I would like to work with the legislature to try to create the incentive and try to take away some of the roadblocks that occur when districts want to merge, and then let's see if districts don't do it on their own.
All right, so when you sat down in the office in mid-July and said, all right, here I am, ready to get started, was there anything that surprised you on the desk? Was there anything that you went through and said, oh, wait a minute, I didn't realize that was going on, or I can't believe that we're doing that here in Michigan?
Well, candidly, I was caught off guard a little bit by the number of school districts that are struggling so badly academically and financially. You know, as a local superintendent, I was focused, you know, on my own school district and making sure that we were successful financially and academically. So I guess I wasn't paying attention as much to see how many schools were struggling, not only financially, but academically. And we have to help those school districts be successful and those communities be successful.
All right, so everyone's going back to school in just a few days. What would you tell parents in terms of what to look for the future of K through 12 here in the state?
Well, I think what we need you to do as a parent, a guardian, grandparent, is to be involved in your child's education. You need to attend school functions. You need to visit the schools, visit the classrooms. You need to set aside, you know, an hour a day to work on reading, math, games, having fun as a family. Working together as parents and educators, we can make a difference in Michigan, but it takes us working together to make that difference. So I'd ask parents to be actively involved in your schools, getting into your child's classroom, see what's going on, and supporting your teachers.
Brian Whiston, thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Appreciate the opportunity. Have a great day.
Okay. It's great. It's great. I really appreciate it.